20 federal agencies released a report that states, with high confidence, the WikiLeaks release of classified information pertaining to the conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan would have no significant impact on national security. Remember this when they decide to attack Assange. In June 2011, Defense Department report obtained by BuzzFeed through a Freedom of Information Act request determined with high confidence that the disclosure of the Iraq dataset will have no direct personal impact on current and former U.S. leadership in Iraq. It was prepared by 20 federal agencies who reviewed the leaked classified documents line by line. The report also discussed that there would be no significant impact on U.S. war operations in Afghanistan. There was one criminal, however, and her name was Chelsea Manning. You should direct your ire at her. And when they tell you the leaks from WikiLeaks resulted in the deaths of anyone at all, remember this. Under oath, the lead investigator, former Brigadier General Carr, admitted this was false. Under defense cross-examination, Carr conceded that the victims' names that he had previously mentioned had not been included in the war logs made public by WikiLeaks. Asked whether the individual who was killed was tied to disclosures, Carr replied, "The Taliban killed him and tied him to the disclosures. We went back and looked for the name in the disclosures. The name of the individual killed was not in the disclosures." On the basis of the witness's clarification, a sustained objection was followed, and the defense was able to scrub from the official record any reference to the alleged killing by the Taliban. Carr said that when his task force reviewed the Afghan war logs, they found about 900 names of local nationals contained in the records. Most of those names were people that were already dead, and under cross-examination, the witness said some could have been misspelled or mistranslated, meaning that they might not have even had the right list of names to begin with. Now, a curious feature of this report is that during Manning's trial, and she belongs in jail, by the way. She should never have been commuted under Obama. Her sentence didn't belong to be a commuted sentence. But during Manning's trial, the U.S. government under Obama referenced this report again and again. And they claimed, using segments that they had cherry-picked from within it, that national security was put at risk. But they didn't let Manning's lawyer look at the documents during the trial. Now, it's clear that despite the best wishes of many of the Trump faithful, Assange would not get a fair trial here, because he has humiliated the unelected bureaucracy to such an extent that this extradition attempt isn't an act of justice, but an act of revenge. And that's because in addition to the 30,000 plus American troops that were wounded and the 4,000 that were killed in Iraq, the best of a generation's blood spilt for trumped up charges and false pretenses, in addition to all of that, we were responsible for a hefty share of collateral damage, and we should have never been there in the first place. Assange humiliated them with the release of the war logs, because there were numerous instances of undisclosed civilian casualties in Iraq and Afghanistan, which, according to the government at the time, could be used to press our adversaries to negatively impact support for the current operations in the region. And you can rest assured that if this was anything more than a smarting bureaucracy hoping to exact revenge from Assange, you'd be hearing that the U.S. government was going after Glenn Greenwald for his coordination with Snowden and the massive leaks about our intelligence agency's information gathering tactics. But instead, there are two standards being applied. Assange gets treated like a criminal, Greenwald as a journalist. And who is running around free as a bird? The actual perpetrator, Chelsea Manning. And let's not forget that Assange ended up holed up in that Ecuadorian consulate either, and why he ended up there. After he started releasing information about the US government, he was suddenly accused of being a rapist in Sweden, a country that's essentially the rape capital of the world that can't even bother to stop migrants from assaulting their women. But no, they had to go after Assange. And why did he end up holed up there for 6 years? While facing the sexual allegation? Well, it wasn't because he was afraid of facing trial in Sweden. No. He has offered numerous times to go to Sweden and face that trial, but only under the circumstances where the US extradition would be denied by Sweden. And that's the sticking point. This isn't about getting some sexual assault charge to stick on Assange. It's about getting him out of the consulate so that when he steps foot out, he can be extradited to the United States where he can face charges of espionage. And it's not like this country has a history of false allegations of rape against high-profile political figures, Kavanaugh. And when you look closely, you'll start to notice all these familiar patterns around the Assange case, like an attempt to tie Assange and Russia together as agitators to the Catalan independence movement. Because apparently we're to believe that Russia has a dog in that fight for some reason. Writing for The Intercept, Glenn Greenwald, as previously mentioned, wrote this: "Yet many of the recent media claims about Assange that have caused this standoff with the Ecuadorian embassy have centered on the alleged role of Russia in the internal Spanish conflict over Catalan independence. They range from highly dubious to demonstrably false. The campaign to depict Catalan unrest as a plot fueled by the Kremlin, Assange, and even Edward Snowden have largely come from fraudulent assertions in the Spanish daily El País and highly dubious data claims from the so-called Hamilton 68 dashboard. The consequences of these false and misleading claims, this actual fake news, have been multifaceted and severe, not just for Assange, but for the diplomatic relations among multiple countries." And just who is responsible for that Hamilton 68 that Greenwald referenced? Well, that would be Bill Kristol, one of the largest proponents of the Iraq War, who is also largely responsible for lobbying the Bush administration to dip its toes into that land. And of course, you're familiar with Kristol, editor of the Weekly Standard, for his outspoken attacks against President Trump. So if you really want to understand what's going on here, this isn't about Russia. This isn't about national security. This is about a humiliated, unelected bureaucracy, what we'd call the deep state in our modern neologism. And foremost among those are ex-members of the CIA, Bill Kristol, neoconservatives that advocated for the Iraq War, and other people that have been humiliated in the court of public opinion related to whether or not the war on terror that expanded well beyond its initial boundaries was a good idea. And so in the coming days, you're sure to hear that Assange is a war criminal. Assange is a foreign agent acting for Kremlin interests or on behalf of Putin. You're sure to hear all these things. You're going to be told that the information he released resulted in deaths. This is demonstrably false. Our federal government says it is false. 20 federal agencies have said it is false, and it is a sham. If he steps foot out of that consulate, if he is extradited to the United States, that man will not live to see the light of day ever again. He will be locked in a cell. And what do the American people lose? What do people around the world lose? What do the forgotten men and women lose? They lose one of their biggest advocates, a stateless civic institution that's responsible for releasing more information, that's responsible for informing the people of the world far better than any media outlet to date. And while you see all of these news corporations rallying around Jim Acosta and CNN, it's a bit troubling that you don't see but one rallying around Assange. You should think about that. I've been humiliated in the court of public opinion related to whether or not the war on terror that expanded well beyond its initial boundaries was a good idea. And so in the coming days, you're sure to hear that Assange is a war criminal. Assange is a foreign agent acting for Kremlin interests or on behalf of Putin. You're sure to hear all these things. You're going to be told that the information he released resulted in deaths. This is demonstrably false. Our federal government says it is false. 20 federal agencies have said it is false, and it is a sham. If he steps foot out of that consulate, if he is extradited to the United States, that man will not live to see the light of day ever again. He will be locked in a cell. And what do the American people lose? What do people around the world lose? What do the forgotten men and women lose? They lose one of their biggest advocates, a stateless civic institution that's responsible for releasing more information, that's responsible for informing the people of the world far better than any media outlet to date. And while you see all of these news corporations rallying around Jim Acosta and CNN, it's a bit troubling that you don't see but one rallying around Assange. You should think about that. You see all of these news corporations rallying